Okay, so here are some of my odds and ends as far as my game collection goes. These are mostly handheld games or these plug-and-play games you may have seen for sale at various stores. First one, this is the Sega Nomad. This is a handheld Sega Genesis. It had a slot, you just plugged all your Sega Genesis games in there. It had an AC adapter. It took 6 AA batteries and went through them like water. Interesting thing, you could hook this up to your TV and use it as a regular, on your TV as a Sega Genesis. This is a Sega Genesis. It also had a second control port in the bottom for 2-player games, so you could actually take this and play 2-player games. And imagine trying to play, the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 split screen on this, and I'm sure that was a lot of fun. This is Sega Game Gear. This was their original handheld system. This was the 8-bit competitor to the Game Boy, more or less. This is basically a Sega Master System in the handheld form. 2 buttons just like Sega Master System, which meant you could play Sega Master System games on it if you had the adapter. This is called the Game Master. It was a third-party peripheral that was not approved by Sega originally. I think later on down the line they actually did approve it. But when it first came out, they did not approve of this, but it literally is just an adapter for the Sega Master System. The games fit right in there. You turn it on, they come on. There's only a couple games that don't really work well, and it's because something about the I guess it didn't have quite as much memory as the Sega Master System, but it usually didn't matter except on like really energy hogging games like Outrun. When you play Outrun, it has these little artifacts on the bottom, but you can still play it. I have a second one because Game Gears tended to go bad after a while. There is like either the sound or the screen will go bad. It's just the electronic components in it go bad, and mine did. But I found a second one for pretty cheap, and I got it here to show off. I have this. This was a widescreen or enlargement adapter thing you could hook onto your system and basically double the screen size. And this actually did, work pretty well. It didn't make the games look bad. It just enlarged the screen, and it was pretty handy. Except it's bulky and huge and silly. This is just a little carrying case I have for the Game Gear. Funny story, I actually got the Game Gear for free back when it came out, because my stepdad used to be a salesman, and one of his earnings for doing well at a convention was they gave him a Game Gear, and that was when it was brand new. These are my various plug-and-play systems. They just plug right into your typical AV out, because they only have one audio and one video. Some of these are mostly like arcade classics or vintage games. This is for the Atari 2600. This is a paddle control, so this featured paddle control games like tennis and breakout and whatever. This was the standard Atari one. It's just like an Atari control, except I think this is a little easier to use than a standard control, but it's still pretty stiff, and it just has the select buttons, and it just brings up a menu and you select the game. The notable one I think on this one is this has Yar's Revenge. This is same thing, but this is an Activision specific game. This is like all the Activision games for the Atari, games like Pitfall and River Raid, etc. And this one had 2 buttons on it for whatever reason, although Atari games used 1 button. Interesting thing about this is that they were based on the Atari 2600 games, but these were not exact ports. It's hard to describe. It's just that if you played it, you know when things weren't quite right. And I remember specifically the version of Pitfall was not an exact replica, and it was just off-putting. This one is specifically Namco, and these are not like the Atari ports. These are like the arcade versions. You know, these actually look exactly like the arcade version. It has Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Rally X, I believe, and I think Galaxian, I believe. I don't remember. This one is Space Invaders. This is it's like the other ones, but this is all like space-themed games. So like Space Invaders, Asteroids, Defender, etc. It's kind of bigger. I kind of like this one. It's just a big, sturdy layout. This one is based on the Intellivision. It has, I believe, 10 Intellivision games on it. Later they made a version that had like 20 Intellivision games. But this was just, you can see this is not based on any specific control. This is like a generic, this looks like a generic Dreamcast control actually. And so, you know, because Intellivisions did not have analog sticks. They didn't have 4 buttons. And so it's just, you know, the cheap, you know, brand. And because it's cheap, it actually did not play very well. I remember when I got this and tried it out, it just didn't play very well. I don't know how else to put it. This was just kind of a generic game. This was not based on any specific arcade games. This is like a pinball game. This featured 3 pinball games, and they were just they just made them for this system. But the cool thing is it has a little plunger you use to launch the ball. But other than that, you know, they use the flippers. Other than that, it really wasn't noteworthy because they weren't based on any pinball games in particular. This was a second Namco unit. This featured Miss Pac-Man, Pole Position, Galaga, Xevious, and Mappyland for whatever reason, you know, because that was a real classic. The cool thing about this is it's got a joystick, but in order to play Pole Position, it actually turns and has resistance to it, and so it actually plays pretty well for, you know, what it is for a racing game. That one is probably one of the better game versions of this. This, you may or may not have heard, this was a 100 games in one control that featured mostly NES games, and it was completely unauthorized. You could buy this at Walgreens for $10, and it just brought up a generic menu that had 101 games on it, many of which were classic Nintendo games. Games like Super Contra or Mario Brothers, the original Mario Brothers, stuff like that. There was a handful of you know, original kind of homebrew games on it that, you know, were kind of crappy, but it's just kind of interesting because this was a mass-produced game system that included, you know, actual Nintendo games on it with no mention of it actually being a Nintendo product. So this was a completely pirated bootleg thing, and I got it at Walgreens. You may or may not be able to still find it. I would be surprised if this is still on the shelves anywhere. But it is generic 101 games in one. If you find it, good luck. Here's a little oddity. It looks like a plush Dreamcast, right? Well, it's actually a Kleenex dispenser. I got this from a Korean website about 10 years ago. There was a joke listing in Electronic Gaming Monthly, and it showed a picture of it. We listed the website. It was all in Korean, but I managed to work my way through it and buy it. I think it was like $10 or 15, and just kind of a cool little one-of-a-kind collectible. So there's more of my games.